The relentless sun of the Arizona desert showed no mercy. Mrs. Carmen Miller felt each ray like a blade piercing her wrinkled skin, marked by 78 years of a hard life. Her bare feet sank into the cracked earth, and the hot wind brought with it the smell of dust and loneliness. There, in the middle of that vast emptiness, the old woman clutched a rusty hoe with trembling hands, digging a hole no one had asked for. Digging her own grave. Her dry eyes no longer held tears. Her body had saved everything for this final moment. In the distance, the sound of an engine approached, but she didn't turn her head. She just kept digging, like someone who had already given up on expecting anything good from life. Before we delve into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10, and tell us what city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. It all began 3 days prior, on a morning that seemed like any other. Mrs. Carmen woke early, as she always did, even though her body pleaded for a few more hours of rest. The adobe house, with its peeling walls and a roof patched with pieces of tarp, was the only home she had known for the past 50 years. There she had raised her 4 children, Stephen, the eldest, Rose, the only daughter, Peter, and Tony, the youngest. There she had buried her husband, James, 15 years ago, when a silent heart attack took him in his sleep. There she kept every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night spent mending other people's clothes to put food on the table. That morning, however, something was different. The silence of the house weighed more than usual. Since Tony, the last child still living with her, had moved to the big city 3 months earlier, Mrs. Carmen had learned to live with loneliness. But this silence was different. It was the silence of someone awaiting bad news. The phone rang at 7:30. It was an old rotary phone, the kind Stephen had insisted on installing years ago, saying it was for emergencies. Mrs. Carmen answered with the hoarse voice of someone who hadn't spoken yet that day. "Hello? Mom? It's Stephen." Her heart skipped a beat. Stephen rarely called. Since he had earned his law degree and opened a practice in the state capital, his visits had become increasingly infrequent, his calls shorter, his excuses more common. "My son, it's good to hear your voice. Is everything all right?" "Mom, I need to tell you something important." His voice was cold, calculated, like someone who had been rehearsing a speech for days. "Tomorrow I'll be there with the others. We need to sort some things out." "Sort out what, my son?" "We'll talk later. Just wanted to let you know." And he hung up without an "I love you," without asking how she was doing, without mentioning the medication she needed to take daily for her heart. Mrs. Carmen stood there still, holding the silent phone, feeling a chill down her spine that no desert sun could warm. The next day arrived faster than she would have liked. Mrs. Carmen woke before dawn, swept the yard, prepared strong coffee, and baked a corn cake, Rose's favorite since she was a little girl. She tidied the house with the care of someone expecting an important guest, even knowing this wasn't just any visit. Something inside her, a mother's instinct that the years hadn't erased, told her this meeting would bring no good news. They arrived around 10 o'clock in the morning, a sleek black car parked in front of the house, raising a cloud of dust that took a while to settle. Stephen was the first to step out, in his grey suit with a leather briefcase tucked under his arm. Then came Rose, with her dyed blonde hair and a dress that must have cost more than Mrs. Carmen earned in a year of mending clothes. Peter and Tony followed closely behind, avoiding their mother's gaze like children who knew they had done something wrong. "Come in, my children. I made coffee and cake." No one replied. Stephen merely nodded and walked in, followed by the others. They sat in the small living room, where the wooden chairs creaked under the weight of their well-fed bodies. Mrs. Carmen served the coffee in silence, noticing that no one touched the cake. "Mom, sit here." Stephen pointed to the chair across from him. "We need to talk." She obeyed, feeling her legs weaken. She looked at each of her children, searching for some sign of affection, some remnant of the love that had once existed. But she only found empty, distant gazes, as if she were a stranger. "Mum, you know we love you, right?" Rose began, in that sweet voice she used when she wanted something. "But the truth is, you can't stay here alone anymore. It's dangerous, you're old, sick." "I'm not sick, my daughter. I take my medicine, I do my things." "Mom, let me finish." Stephen interrupted impatiently. "We talked and came to a decision. We're going to sell this house and this land. There's already an interested buyer, a rancher from the area who wants to expand his property." Mrs. Carmen's world collapsed. That house, that piece of land, was all she had. It was the inheritance James had left, the only asset remaining from a lifetime of labor. Sell it? But this house is mine. It's where I've lived for 50 years. Where I raised you. You'll live in an assisted living facility, Mom. Peter spoke for the first time, unable to look at her. A good place in Phoenix. You'll have people caring for you, a doctor, everything properly handled. An assisted living facility? The word came out as a whisper. You want to put me in an assisted living facility? It's not putting you, Mom. It's caring for you. Tony tried to soften it, but his voice faltered. You deserve to rest. Mrs. Carmen felt her chest tighten. It wasn't a heart attack. It was something worse. It was the pain of realizing that the 4 adults sitting in front of her were no longer the children she had known. They were strangers, using pretty words to disguise their cruelty. What? Don't want to go? Stephen sighed, opening his leather briefcase. From inside he pulled out a stack of papers. Mom, you don't have a choice. The house is in Dad's name, and since he died without a will, the inheritance belongs to the children. You have the right to use it, but the property is ours, and we've decided to sell. Your father wanted me to stay here. He promised me. A promise isn't worth anything without a signed paper, Mom. I'm an attorney, I know. The cynicism in Stephen's voice was cutting. Mrs. Carmen looked at Rose, seeking some support, but her daughter averted her gaze. Peter and Tony remained silent, like accomplices in a crime they didn't have the courage to commit alone. You're going to kick me out of my home? Her voice was a mere thread. After everything I've done for you? Mom, don't be so dramatic. Rose rolled her eyes. You'll be fine at the assisted living facility. You'll have company, activities. I don't want company from strangers. I want my home, my life. Stephen stood up, putting the papers away. You have a week to pack your things. Next Friday we'll be back to take you to the assisted living facility. The buyer is already eager to close the deal. He left without saying goodbye, followed by Rose and Peter. Tony hesitated at the door, looking at his mother with something that might have been remorse, but he said nothing. He just lowered his head and left. The black car departed, leaving behind only dust and silence. Mrs. Carmen remained there, sitting in the wooden chair, looking at the untouched corn cake. The tears that hadn't come for years finally found their way down her wrinkled face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of anger, of disappointment, of a pain so deep it had no name. She spent the following days in a daze. She didn't eat properly, didn't sleep, didn't speak to anyone. The neighbors, concerned, knocked on her door, but she didn't answer. The world outside kept turning, indifferent to her suffering. On Thursday night, the eve of the day set for her removal, Mrs. Carmen made a decision. If her children wanted to take her from that house, she wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She wouldn't go to any assisted living facility. She wouldn't be treated like old furniture discarded when no longer useful. She would choose her own destiny. Before dawn on Friday, while the sky was still dark, Mrs. Carmen put on her simplest dress, slipped on the leather sandals she had worn for 20 years, and left the house. She took nothing but an old hoe she found in the corner of the yard, the same one James had used to tend his garden. She walked towards the desert, away from the road, away from any sign of human life. She walked for hours until the sun rose and began to beat down mercilessly. She walked until her legs couldn't bear it anymore, until thirst dried her throat, until there was nothing left around but cracked earth and an unforgiving sky. There, in the middle of nowhere, Mrs. Carman stopped. She looked around, making sure she was completely alone, and then, with the last strength she had, she began to dig. Each strike of the hoe into the earth was a farewell. Farewell to the home she loved, to the children who betrayed her, to a life that hadn't been worth living. She was digging her own grave, not out of despair but out of dignity. If she was going to die, it would be by her own choice, not in a cold assisted living facility surrounded by strangers. The hole grew deeper, the sun climbed higher, and Mrs. Carman grew weaker. At one point, when she could no longer lift the hoe, the blade hit something hard. It wasn't a rock, it was something different. With trembling hands, she brushed away the dirt and revealed a metal box, rusted by time, but still intact. Her heart, which she thought had already stopped feeling anything, quickened. What could it be, buried there in the middle of nowhere? With difficulty, Mrs. Carman pulled the box out of the hole. It was heavy, heavier than she expected. The lock was corroded, and with a little effort she managed to open it. Inside, she found yellowed papers, some old coins, and a letter. A letter with her name written on the front, in handwriting she would recognize anywhere. It was James's handwriting. The sun continued to beat down, her body continued to ache, but none of that mattered anymore. With trembling hands, Mrs. Carman opened the letter and began to read. And with each word, each line, the world she knew transformed into something completely different. The desert wind blew strong at that moment, kicking up dust around her, as if the earth itself wanted to witness that revelation. Mrs. Carman didn't know it, but that letter would change everything. Not just her fate, but the fate of all who had abandoned her. The grave she was digging to die in would become the cradle of a rebirth, and the children who had cast her aside would soon discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. The letter began simply, like everything James did. "My Carman," the first line read, "if you are reading this, it is because I have passed on and because something very wrong has happened." Mrs. Carman felt a lump in her throat. The handwriting was shaky, likely written in the last months of her husband's life, when he already sensed his weak heart wouldn't hold out much longer. "I never told you everything about my family because I was ashamed. Ashamed of what my father did, of the money he accumulated in ways that weren't right. When he died, I inherited not just the land, but also a secret I buried here, in the farthest place from everything, where no one would ever look." Mrs. Carman looked at the metal box, at the old coins that gleamed even covered in dirt. James had always been a simple, hard-working man who never flaunted anything. She would never have imagined he harbored such a secret. "Inside this box is enough for you to live well for the rest of your life. Gold, ancient coins, things my father collected that I never had the courage to use. I wanted it to be for you, just for you when I was no longer here. I don't trust our children, Carman. I saw how they grew up. I saw the greed in their eyes, the shame they felt for us. They don't deserve any of this." Tears now flowed freely down Mrs. Carman's face. James knew. He had always known what their children were like, even when she refused to see it. "I registered this land in your name, Carman, at the county clerk's office, legally, the right way. The document is at the bottom of the box along with everything else. The house and the land are yours, only yours, and no one can take them from you. If anyone tries, show them this paper. It's your protection." Mrs. Carman plunged her hands into the box, pushing aside the coins until she found a thick envelope, sealed with wax. Inside, there was an official document with stamps and signatures transferring the property of the house and land to Mary Carman Miller, her. The date was 2 months before James's death. He had planned everything. He had foreseen that the children would try something like this, and he had ensured she had a way to defend herself. "I love you, my dear. I've always loved you since the first day I saw you at that market selling lace. You were the best thing that ever happened in my life. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. You are strong, Carmen, stronger than you imagine." The letter ended there, with "Your James" scrawled underneath. Simple, direct, as he always was. Mrs. Carman remained there, sitting on the edge of the grave she had dug for herself, holding the letter to her chest. The sun continued to beat down, her body continued to ache, but something inside her had changed. The resignation that had brought her there, the willingness to give up, had been replaced by something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. A clean, righteous anger that burned inside her like embers. Anger at the children who betrayed her, who tried to steal what was rightfully hers. Anger at herself for almost giving in, for almost letting them win. But also hope. Hope that it wasn't too late. Hope that James, even in death, had given her the weapons to fight. With difficulty, Mrs. Carman stood up. Her legs trembled, her head spun from hunger and thirst, but she forced herself to stand upright. She tucked the letter and the document into her dress pocket, close to her body, where no one could take them. The coins and gold she left in the box, burying it again in the same spot, marking the place with a large rock. She would return for them. But first, she had matters to resolve. The walk back was harder than the walk there. The midday sun gave no quarter, and Mrs. Carman had to stop several times to rest. With each pause, she looked at the document in her pocket, making sure it was still there, that it hadn't been a dream. When she finally spotted the dirt road leading to her house, it was already past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was then that she saw the cars. Not just Stephen's black car, but 2 others, a white pickup truck and a blue sedan. They were there, waiting for her. Mrs. Carman felt her heart quicken, but not from fear, from determination. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her head, and continued walking towards her house. When she reached the yard, the scene she found was chaotic. All her children were there, along with 2 people she didn't know. A stout man in a hat, who must have been the buyer, and a woman in glasses, probably an attorney. Boxes were scattered across the floor, furniture being carried out. They were dismantling her home. "Mom!" Rose was the first to see her. Her daughter's face changed from surprise to irritation in seconds. "Where have you been? We looked everywhere for you." "You looked, did you?" Mrs. Carman's voice came out firm, firmer than she herself expected. "Looked? For what? To throw me into an assisted living facility while you sell what's mine?" Stephen approached, his suit now wrinkled and sweaty. "Mom, you disappeared. We were worried. We thought something had happened." "Something did happen." She took the document from her pocket and extended it towards him. "Read this." Stephen took the paper impatiently, his eyes scanning the lines. As he read, his expression changed. From irritation to confusion, from confusion to disbelief, from disbelief to something Mrs. Carman recognized immediately, fear. This can't be true." He stammered, passing the document to the attorney. "It's fake. It has to be fake." The woman in glasses examined the paper carefully, checking the stamps, signatures, seals. "It's not fake." Her voice was professional, neutral. "This document is legitimate. The property is in Mary Carman Miller's name. It was legally transferred 15 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Rose dropped the box she was holding. Peter and Tony exchanged desperate glances. The stout man in the hat pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and began to wipe his sweaty forehead. "So, no sale?" he asked, his voice trembling. "There's no sale at all." Mrs. Carman replied, looking directly at Stephen. "This house is mine. This land is mine. And you have no right to anything." Stephen took a step forward, his face red with rage. "You can't do this. We're your children. We have rights." "Rights?" Mrs. Carman let out a bitter laugh. "You wanted to throw me into an assisted living facility to die alone. You wanted to sell the house where I've lived for 50 years. You wanted to treat me like trash, and now, you talk about rights? Mum, we just wanted what was best for you." Rose tried with that falsely sweet voice. "Don't give me that, Rose. I raised you. I know when you're lying." She looked at each of her children one by one. "I went hungry so you could eat. I worked until my hands bled so you could go to school. I gave up everything so you could have a better life. And this is how you repay me?" No one answered. The wind blew, raising dust in the yard. And for a moment, the only sound was the rustling of trees in the distance. "Leave," Mrs. Carman pointed towards the road. "All of you, and take those boxes back inside. I want my house exactly as it was." "Mum, we need to talk," Stephen insisted. "There's nothing more to discuss. You made your choice. Now live with it." The stout man in the hat was the first to leave, mumbling something about wasted time and incompetent attorneys. The woman in glasses followed him without looking back. Rose, Peter and Tony carried the boxes back inside in silence, their heads bowed, like children sent to their rooms. Stephen was the last. He stopped in front of Mrs. Carman, his gaze hard, calculating. "This won't stand, Mom. I'm an attorney. I'll find a way to contest this document." "Try it." She met his gaze without faltering. "But remember one thing, my son. Your father knew who you were. He foresaw all this, and if he left something hidden to protect me from you, who's to say he didn't leave other things too?" Stephen's face paled. Without another word, he got into the car and drove off, the tires kicking up dust as he disappeared down the road. Mrs. Carman remained there, standing in the yard, watching the cars vanish on the horizon. Her body was exhausted, her throat dry, but inside she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace, not the peace of resignation, nor the peace of giving up. It was the peace of someone who fought and won, the peace of someone who discovered, at 78 years old, that she still had the strength to defend herself. She went into the house, looking at the displaced furniture, at the mess her children had left. She would have work to do to put everything back in order, but it didn't matter. That house was hers, and no one else would take her from it. As she put the kettle on the stove to make coffee, Mrs. Carman thought of James, of the simple man she had loved for over 50 years, who even after death continued to care for her. "Thank you, my dear," she whispered into the emptiness of the kitchen. "Thank you for everything." The coffee was almost ready when she heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud or urgent, but hesitant, almost timid. Mrs. Carman went to the door and opened it. Standing there with red eyes and twisting his hat in his hands was Tony, the youngest, the one who had always been weaker than the others, more easily influenced. "Mom!" His voice failed. "Can I come in?" She looked at her son for a long moment. She saw the boy he had once been, the one who was afraid of the dark and ran to her bed when he had a nightmare. But she also saw the man who had remained silent while his siblings planned to cast her aside. "Come in." She opened the door wider. "But you'll have to help me clean up all this mess." Tony entered, his shoulders slumped in shame. Mrs. Carman closed the door behind him, unsure if this was the beginning of a reconciliation or just another disappointment waiting to happen. Only time would tell. The following days were strange, as if Mrs. Carman was learning to live again. The house, which for so long had seemed like a silent tomb, now had movement. Tony had stayed, sleeping in the back room that had once been his, helping his mother with chores she could no longer do alone. But living together wasn't easy. The silence between them weighed more heavily than any words. Tony worked in silence, avoiding his mother's gaze, as if carrying a guilt too great to fit in his chest, and Mrs. Carman, as much as she wanted to forgive, still felt the wound open, still saw in her son's eyes the shadow of betrayal. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, while they were hanging laundry on the clothesline in the backyard, that Tony finally mustered the courage to speak. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Mrs. Carman continued to secure a towel with clothespins without looking at him. "Then tell me." It was Stephen who planned everything. He found out Dad had left something hidden. He didn't know what, but he knew there was something. He spent months searching, sifting through papers, asking old folks in town. It was he who convinced us that you needed to go to the assisted living facility. And you believed him. Tony swallowed hard. We wanted to believe him, Mom. Stephen said it was for your own good, that you would suffer less, that we would be able to care for you properly. But deep down, we knew it was a lie. Mrs. Carman finally turned to her son. Her eyes, which Tony remembered always being full of affection, were now hard as stone. "Why did you stay, Tony? Why did you come back?" He took a moment to answer. When he spoke, his voice was a mere whisper. "Because when I saw you there, standing in the yard, facing everyone, I saw the woman who raised me, the woman who stayed up all night when I was sick, who sold her own things to buy my school supplies. And I realized that I had lost myself, Mom, that I had become a person I don't even recognize." A tear rolled down Tony's face, but he made no move to wipe it away. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did can't be undone. But I want to at least try, Mom. Try to be the son you deserve." Mrs. Carman remained silent for a long moment, the wind rustling the clothes. On the line, the sun painting the backyard golden. Finally, she let out a long, weary sigh, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once, my son. It's something you build, day after day. You want to stay? Then stay. But you'll have to prove it with actions, not with words." Tony nodded, his eyes still watery. "I'll prove it, Mom. I swear." And so, a new routine began. Tony woke early, helped Mrs. Carman with breakfast, tended the yard, fixed broken things around the house. Gradually, the silence between them became less heavy. Conversations returned, first about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, the news, and then about bigger things. It was in one of these conversations that Tony revealed something Mrs. Carman didn't expect. "Mom, Stephen hasn't given up. He's looking for a way to nullify that document. He hired an attorney from Phoenix, a specialist in inheritance law." Mrs. Carman felt a chill in her stomach, but maintained a calm expression. "And will he succeed?" "I don't know, Mom, but he's determined. He said he won't let this go." The old woman looked at her son, weighing her words. "And you, Tony, whose side are you on in this story?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds. Tony swallowed hard before answering. "I'm on your side, Mom, no matter the cost." Mrs. Carman nodded, satisfied. But inside her concern grew. She knew Stephen. She knew the ambition that burned in her eldest son's eyes. He wouldn't rest until he got what he wanted. It was then that she made a decision. "Tony, tomorrow we're going into town. There's something I need to do." Her son didn't ask what. He simply agreed, sensing his mother had a plan. The next day, bright and early, the two took the bus that passed on the highway. The trip to town was long, almost a 2-hour drive on dirt roads until they reached pavement, then another hour to the urban centre. Mrs. Carman looked out the window in silence, watching the landscape change from the dry desert to irrigated fields, from fields to the first houses, from houses to buildings. The city had changed a lot since she had last been there over 10 years ago. It was bigger, noisier, more confusing. But Mrs. Carman didn't let herself be intimidated. She had a clear objective. "Where are we going, Mom?" Tony asked when they got off the bus. "To the county clerk's office, and then to an attorney." Tony's eyes widened, but he said nothing. He followed his mother through the busy streets, helping her cross crowded avenues, guiding her through the labyrinths of packed sidewalks. The county clerk's office was in an old building, with a peeling facade and worn marble stairs. Mrs. Carman entered with an upright posture, her head held high, as if the place belonged to her. "Good afternoon." She addressed the counter, where a young woman in glasses was typing on a computer. "I need to register a will." The woman looked at her in surprise, but quickly composed herself. "Do you have the document?" "No, I want to make one now, a living will." The next few hours were long, filled with papers, signatures, and stamps. Mrs. Carman dictated each word carefully, ensuring there was no ambiguity. The house and land, after her death, would be donated to the community to build a school, a health clinic, anything that would help the struggling families in the region. Not a penny, not an inch of land would go to the children who had betrayed her. Tony watched everything in silence, his face pale. When they left the county clerk's office, he finally spoke. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "I am." Her voice was firm. "I spent my whole life giving you everything, and look how you repaid me. I won't let you fight over my remains like vultures after I die." "But what about me, Mom?" Mrs. Carman stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, looking at her son. "Do you want an inheritance, Tony? Do you want money, land, things?" He shook his head, his eyes downcast. "No, Mom, it's not that." "Then what do you want?" I want you to truly forgive me. I want a chance to be a good son for whatever time is left." Mrs. Carman was silent for a moment. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and touched her son's face as she had when he was a child. "Forgiveness is something we build together, my son, one day at a time." Tony held his mother's hand against his face, tears streaming unashamedly. There, in the middle of that busy sidewalk, with strangers rushing past, mother and son sealed a silent pact. A pact for a new beginning. But the journey wasn't over yet. The next stop was the attorney's office. Not just any attorney, but the only one Mrs. Carman trusted. Dr. Ethan Hayes, a 60-year-old man who had been James's schoolmate, and who was now one of the most respected attorneys in the city. The office was in a modern building, all glass and steel, which contrasted with the old county clerk's office. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, asked them to wait. A few minutes later, Dr. Hayes appeared personally to greet them. "Mrs. Carman!" He opened his arms, his face lighting up. "Long time no see. I heard what happened, and I was going to call you this week." "How did you hear, Doctor?" "This world is small, Mrs. Carman, and small-town attorneys know everything." He gestured for them to come in. "Come, let's talk." Dr. Hayes's office was comfortable, with bookshelves covering the walls and a large window overlooking the town square. He offered coffee, which Mrs. Carman accepted, and listened to the entire story in silence, his fingers intertwined under his chin. When she finished, he let out a long sigh. "Mrs. Carman, the document you have is solid. James did everything correctly with registration, witnesses, the whole package. It will be very difficult for Stephen to overturn it. Difficult, but not impossible? Impossible doesn't exist in law, he admitted. But to annul this document, he'll have to prove some irregularity, some fraud. And, from what I've seen, there's none of that. What if he invents something? Dr. Hayes smiled, a smile that had something predatory about it. That's the thing, Mrs. Carman. Stephen is an attorney, but not a good one. He's one of those who bought his way through school and pulled strings to get ahead. He doesn't know the law as he should, and he underestimates those who do. Are you saying you can help me? I'm saying I'm going to help myself. He leaned forward. James was my friend. We grew up together, dreamed. Together. He helped me when I had nothing, when no one believed in me. I owe him more than I can ever repay, and if helping his widow against a bunch of ungrateful children is the way to honor that debt, then that's what I'm going to do. Mrs. Carman felt her eyes well up, but she didn't let the tears fall. It wasn't a time for weakness. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Don't thank me yet. He stood up, went to the bookshelf and pulled out a folder. Thank me when we win. And we will win, Mrs. Carman. You can bet on it. When they left the office, it was already getting dark. The city lights began to come on and the air was cooler. Mrs. Carman felt tired but also strangely light. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in the fight. Mom, are you okay? Tony asked, offering his arm for her to lean on. I am, my son. I'm better than I've been in years. They walked to the bus station, bought their return tickets, and waited for the bus on a wooden bench. The activity around them was intense. Traveling families, street vendors, children running. Mrs. Carman observed everything with curious eyes, as if she were rediscovering the world. Mum, can I ask you something? Tony broke the silence. Ask. That treasure Dad left buried, are you going to get it? Mrs. Carman was silent for a moment, thinking. The gold, the coins, all of it was still there, buried in the middle of nowhere, waiting for her. One day, my son, when the time is right, for now it's safe where it is. Tony nodded without pressing. He had learned that his mother had her own timing, her own reasons, and that questioning her too much led nowhere. The bus arrived, and they boarded. The return trip was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Mrs. Carman rested her head against the window, watching the city lights diminish until they disappeared, giving way to the darkness of the desert. She closed her eyes, thinking of James, of Dr. Hayes, of Tony, thinking of the children who had abandoned her and what lay ahead. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time, she felt she could win. The following weeks brought a strange calm, like the silence before a storm. Stephen didn't appear, nor did he send any messages. Rose and Peter also vanished, as if they had been swallowed by the earth. It was a disturbing silence that made Mrs. Carman wake in the middle of the night with a racing heart, waiting for something she couldn't name. But life went on, stubbornly as ever. The desert waited for no one. Plants needed water, animals needed food, the house needed care. Mrs. Carman immersed herself in work, finding in it a distraction from her somber thoughts. Tony proved day by day that his words were not empty. He woke before the sun, tended the yard, fixed fences, fetched water from the well. At night, he sat with his mother on the porch, listening to stories of the past, of a time when family was still family. It was on one of those nights under the starry desert sky that Mrs. Carman told the story she had never told anyone. Your father wasn't much of a talker, you know. She began, her eyes lost in the dark. But there was one night, a little before he died, that he called me to talk. He said he had something important to tell me. Tony adjusted in his chair, attentive. What was it, Mom? He told me about his grandfather. Your great-grandfather, a man I never knew, who died before I was born. It seems he was a traveling merchant, one of those who crossed the desert carrying goods from one place to another, and on those trips he found things, valuable things. What kind of things? Your father wasn't sure. He spoke of church gold, ancient relics, coins from another century, things his great-grandfather found in ruins along the way, or that he received from people who couldn't pay him otherwise. He never sold anything. He just kept collecting, hiding. When he died, he passed it to his son, who passed it to your grandfather, who passed it to your father. And why did Dad never use this treasure? Mrs. Carman sighed. Shame, my son. Your father was ashamed of its origin. He thought it was ill-gotten, that it would bring a curse, but he also didn't have the courage to get rid of it. So he buried it in the middle of nowhere and pretended it didn't exist. Until you found it. Until I found it. She confirmed. Your father left that letter because he knew I would need it one day. And he was right. Tony remained silent for a long moment, processing the story. Mom, do you think Stephen knows all about this? He knows something exists. He doesn't know what or where. That's why he was so desperate to get me out of here. What if he finds out where it is? Mrs. Carman looked at her son firmly. That's why that treasure will stay where it is until I decide what to do with it, and that's why you won't tell anyone, understood? I won't tell, Mom. I swear. The pact was sealed there, under the stars, with the desert wind as a witness. Mrs. Carman trusted her son, or at least she was trying to trust him. Time would tell if that trust was deserved. The following days brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Zelda, the closest neighbor, appeared one afternoon with news that made Mrs. Carman's blood run cold. Carman, have you heard about outsiders lurking around here? Outsiders how? Some men in suits in a black car. They're asking about you, about your family, about James's history. They've been to Old Man Joe's general store, to Frank's bar. They even spoke to the pastor at the church. Mrs. Carman felt a tightening in her chest. And what did they ask? They wanted to know everything, Carman. Where you came from, how you met James, if he had a family before. Strange stuff, you know. Very strange. When Mrs. Zelda left, Mrs. Carman sat in the kitchen chair, her heart pounding. Stephen was acting, she knew. He was looking for something he could use against her, some loophole, some weakness. Mum, what do we do? Tony asked, worried. We do nothing, she replied, trying to stay calm. We wait. Those who have nothing to hide have nothing to fear. But inside, she feared. She feared what Stephen might discover, what he might invent, what he might do. The answer came faster than she expected. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. Not a common letter, but an official document with the court seal. Mrs. Carman opened it with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the lines of legal language she barely understood. Tony read over her shoulder. Mom, Stephen is suing you. The document was a summons. Stephen had filed a lawsuit, alleging that the property transfer document was fraudulent, that James was not of sound mind when he signed it, and that Mrs. Carman had manipulated her husband to steal the children's inheritance. The accusations were absurd, monstrous, but there they were, printed on official paper, with a deadline for response. That scoundrel! Mrs. Carman whispered, anger rising in her chest. The nerve of that man! She called Dr. Hayes the same day. The attorney listened calmly, asking her to read every word of the document. This is what I expected, Mrs. Carman. He doesn't have a case, so he's going to try to win by sheer bluster. And now, Doctor, now we defend ourselves. Do you have proof that James was lucid when he signed that document? I have the letter he left, and there are witnesses, people who were with him at that time. Perfect. Can you gather those witnesses? Mrs. Carman thought for a moment. I can. I'll talk to Mrs. Zelda, to Old Man Joe at the general store, to everyone who knew James. Do that. The more testimonies we have, the better. And Mrs. Carman, yes? Don't let this get you down. Stephen is desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. We're going to use that against him. When she hung up, Mrs. Carman was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up, picked up the shawl she wore when going out, and turned to Tony. Come with me. We have visits to make. The following days were a marathon. Mrs. Carman knocked on every door in the community, talked to everyone who had known James, collected statements, recalled stories. She discovered that her husband was more beloved than she had imagined. Every neighbor had a memory of him, a kindness he had done, a favor he never asked back. James was too good for this world, said Old Man Joe at the general store, his eyes watery. When I was in debt, he paid my bill and never charged me. He said I could pay when I could. I still owe it today, and now I have no one to pay. He helped me build my house, said Frank, the bar owner. He came every weekend for months, without asking for anything in return. A man like that manipulated? Never. He knew what he wanted and did what he thought was right. Mr. James baptized my grandson, recalled Mrs. Alice, the oldest spiritual healer in the region. A week before he died, he was here, as lucid as ever, talking about life, about death, about what comes next. He knew the end was near, but he wasn't afraid. He had peace. Each testimony was a piece of the puzzle, proof that Stephen was lying. Mrs. Carman wrote everything down in an old notebook, with shaky but legible handwriting, building her defense word by word. When she took the notebook to Dr. Hayes, the attorney smiled for the first time since the story began. Mrs. Carman, this is worth gold. With these depositions, Stephen doesn't stand a chance. So we're going to win. We're going to do more than win. We're going to bury his career. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. It was enough time to prepare, but too short to calm her nerves. Mrs. Carman spent sleepless nights, going over every detail, every argument, every possible question. Tony stayed by her side, bringing tea, offering words of comfort that didn't always help. On the eve of the hearing, something unexpected happened. A car stopped in front of the house, not Stephen's black car, but a faded blue sedan that Mrs. Carman recognized immediately. It was Peter. Her middle son got out of the car slowly, as if his legs didn't want to obey. He was thin, dejected, with deep circles under his eyes and disheveled hair. He didn't look like the arrogant man who had been there weeks earlier, demanding she go to the assisted living facility. "Mom." His voice was a mere thread. "Can I talk to you?" Mrs. Carman crossed her arms, not moving from the porch. "Speak." "Not here. In private." She looked at her son for a long moment, measuring, evaluating. Then she gestured for him to come in. Peter sat in the same chair he had occupied at the fateful meeting, but now his body was slumped, defeated. "Mum, I came to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For everything. For participating in that madness, for staying quiet while Stephen planned to cast you aside. I was a coward, Mum. I was weak." Mrs. Carman said nothing, just waited. "Stephen, he went crazy, Mom. Ever since you showed that document, he talks about nothing else. He spent weeks looking for something to use against you, spent a fortune on attorneys and investigators. And when he found nothing, he started making things up." "Making up what?" "Lies, Mom. Lies about you, about Dad, about everything. He hired people to give false testimony, to forge documents. I saw it with my own eyes." Mrs. Carman's blood ran cold. "And why are you telling me this now?" Peter lifted his face, his eyes red. "Because I can't take it anymore, Mum. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't live with this guilt. What we did was wrong, and what Stephen is doing now is criminal. I don't want to be a part of it." The silence that followed was long. heavy. Mrs. Carman looked at her son, trying to decipher if it was true or another trap. "And what do you want from me, Peter?" "I want to help, Mom. I have proof of what Stephen is doing. Emails, messages, recordings. I can give everything to your attorney." "And in return?" Peter shook his head. "I don't want anything in return. I just want to be able to look at myself in the mirror again." Mrs. Carman was silent for a long moment. Then she got up and went to the stove, where the kettle was still hot. "Want some coffee?" Peter let out a shaky sigh, as if he had been holding his breath for hours. "Yes, Mom, thank you." While serving the coffee, Mrs. Carman thought about what she had just heard. If Peter was telling the truth, the evidence he had could change everything. If he was lying, it was another stab in the back. But something in her son's eyes, a genuine pain, a repentance that seemed more real than anything she had seen in recent weeks, made her want to believe. "Come by early tomorrow, before the hearing," she said, placing the cup in front of him. "Bring everything you have. We'll look at it together." Peter nodded, his hands trembling around the cup. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for giving me a chance." Mrs. Carman didn't reply. She just sat in the chair across from her son and drank her coffee in silence, as the sun set outside, painting the sky blood red. The hearing would be the next day. And now, everything could be different. The morning of the hearing dawned grey, with heavy clouds covering the desert sky. It was rare to rain at that time of year, but the air was charged, as if nature itself knew something important was about to happen. Peter arrived at 6 in the morning, even before the sun tried to break through the clouds. He carried a worn briefcase under his arm, full of papers, message screenshots, and a USB drive. His eyes were still red, but there was a determination in them that Mrs. Carman hadn't seen in years. "It's everything I could gather," he said, placing the briefcase on the kitchen table. Emails from Stephen coordinating with attorneys on how to fabricate evidence. Messages from him offering money for people to lie in court. Even a recording of a call where he admits the document is legitimate, but that it doesn't matter because he'll win by bluster. Mrs. Carman picked up the briefcase carefully, as if it were made of crystal. "This could put him in jail." "It could, Mom. And maybe it should." Tony, who had woken up with the noise, entered the kitchen still in his pajamas. Seeing his brother, he stopped at the door, his body tense. "What's he doing here?" "He came to help," Mrs. Carman replied without taking her eyes off. "The documents. Sit down, Tony. We need to talk." The conversation that followed was difficult. Tony didn't trust Peter and had good reasons not to. But gradually, as the older brother showed the evidence, explained what he had witnessed, distrust gave way to reluctant acceptance. "Even if you're telling the truth, it doesn't erase what you did," Tony said, his arms crossed. "I know." Peter lowered his head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to do the right thing, for the first time in a long time," Mrs. Carman interrupted before the argument escalated. "You two will have plenty of time to sort this out later. For now, we need to get ready. The hearing is at 10. The drive to town was made in silence. Tony drove a neighbor's borrowed car, Mrs. Carman sat in the back seat, and Peter followed in a separate vehicle. The tension was palpable, like electricity before a storm. The courthouse was in the center of town, an imposing building with white columns and a marble staircase. Mrs. Carman had never been inside. To her, justice had always been something distant, something for important people. But now, climbing those steps with firm strides, she felt that this place was also hers, that she had the right to be there, to defend what was hers. Dr. Hayes was already waiting in the lobby, impeccable in his dark suit. "Mrs. Carman, good morning." He shook her hand firmly. "Are you ready?" "Ready as I've ever been, Doctor." "Excellent, because I have news." He lowered his voice, pulling her aside. "I received a call last night. It seems someone from the family wants to cooperate with our defense." "I know, Mrs." Carmen indicated Peter, who was approaching. "It's my son, Peter. He brought evidence." Dr. Hayes looked at Peter with a mixture of surprise and caution. Then he extended his hand. "Let's see what you've got." The minutes leading up to the hearing were frantic. Dr. Hayes examined the documents with eagle eyes, asking questions, noting important points. Each time he found something particularly incriminating, his eyes gleamed. "This is dynamite," he murmured, holding an email in which Stephen discussed with a consultant how to forge a medical report. "With this, we not only win the case, we destroy his credibility forever." The courtroom door opened at 10 o'clock sharp. The room was austere, with dark wooden benches and an unapproachable-looking judge seated high above. On the other side, Stephen was already in his place, flanked by 2 attorneys in expensive suits. Rose was seated behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line. When Mrs. Carmen entered, Stephen looked at her with contempt. But there was something else in that gaze, a shadow of uncertainty, perhaps of fear. He hadn't expected her to appear so prepared, so confident. The judge opened the session with the usual formalities. Stephen's attorneys presented their version, accusations of fraud, manipulation, the deceased's mental incapacity. Each word was a stab, each insinuation an attempt to paint Mrs. Carmen as a greedy villain who had stolen her own children's inheritance. Dr. Hayes listened in silence, occasionally making notes. When it was his turn to speak, he stood calmly, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, what we have just heard is a creative narrative, worthy of a prime-time drama, but like all fiction, it doesn't stand up to contact with reality." He began to present the evidence, one by one. The transfer document, authenticated and registered at the county clerk's office, the testimonies of witnesses who knew James, the letter he had left, written in his own hand. The deceased, James Miller, was not an incapacitated man. He was a lucid, determined man who knew the nature of his own children and took steps to protect his wife. "This is not fraud, Your Honor. This is prudence." Stephen shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. His attorneys exchanged worried glances, but Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. "It happens, Your Honor, that the defense has one more thing to present. Proof that the plaintiff in this action, Mr. Stephen Miller, not only knew the document was legitimate, but deliberately conspired to fabricate false evidence and bribe witnesses." The silence that followed was absolute. Stephen's face paled. "That's a lie!" He stood up, pointing at Dr. Hayes. "This old man has no proof. Mr. Miller, sit down," the judge ordered, his voice sharp. "Dr. Hayes, please present that evidence." The attorney opened the folder Peter had handed him. He passed the documents to the court bailiff, who took them to the judge. As the magistrate read, his expression grew, increasingly grim. "Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say about these emails?" Stephen looked at his attorneys, seeking support. They avoided his gaze. That was taken out of context. I was merely—" "There's also a recording," Dr. Hayes interrupted, "in which you admit in no uncertain terms that the transfer document is authentic, but that you intend to win the case through illegal means. Would Your Honor care to hear it?" The judge didn't need to reply. The recording was played, and Stephen's voice filled the room, confident, arrogant, admitting everything he had done and planned to do. When the audio finished, the silence was deafening. "Your Honor," Dr. Hayes spoke, In light of this evidence, I request not only a complete dismissal of the lawsuit, but also the forwarding of these records to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of crimes of judicial fraud, falsification of documents, and attempted bribery." Stephen collapsed in his chair, his face ashen. Rose put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. The prosecution's attorneys were already putting away their papers, like rats deserting a sinking ship. The judge brought down his gavel. "Case dismissed entirely. The records will be forwarded to the District Attorney's Office. This session is adjourned." Mrs. Carman didn't move for a long moment. The world seemed to spin in slow motion around her. People standing up, voices murmuring, doors opening. She felt Tony's and Peter's hands on her shoulders, felt Dr. Hayes squeezing her hand, but everything seemed distant, like a dream. Then, slowly, reality set in. She had won. Against everything and everyone, she had won. "Mum, are you okay?" Tony asked, worried. She looked at her son, then at Peter, then at the door, through which Stephen had hastily exited. "I am, my son. I'm very well." Outside the courthouse, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. Rays of light descended upon the city like blessings, warming the air that had previously been heavy. Mrs. Carman stopped at the top of the staircase, taking a deep breath. "It's over, Mum," Peter said, his voice choked. "It's finally over." "No, my son," she replied, looking at the horizon. "This is just the beginning." She said nothing more. She simply descended the steps, a 78-year-old woman who had faced her own children, the system, the whole world, and had won. The journey wasn't over. There was still much to do, the buried treasure, the community that needed help, the family that needed to be rebuilt. But for now, in that moment, under the sun that finally shone, Mrs. Carman allowed herself to feel something she had long forgotten: peace. The news of what happened in court spread through the community like wildfire. Within days, the entire region knew of Mrs. Carman's victory, Stephen's downfall, the unexpected turn of events. People came from miles around to see her, to shake her hand, to hear the story from her own mouth. "Mrs. Carman, you are an inspiration," said the younger women with admiration in their eyes. "You showed those ungrateful children that old folks aren't trash to be thrown away," shouted the older men, pounding their chests. She received everyone with coffee and corn cake, listening more than talking, smiling more than complaining. Inside, however, the peace she had felt after the trial gradually gave way to restlessness. The legal battle was won, but there were wounds no court could heal. A week after the hearing, Stephen was formally indicted by the District Attorney's Office. The charges were serious: judicial fraud, falsification of documents, attempted bribery, among others. His attorneys, the same ones who had abandoned him in the courtroom, now refused to represent him. His career, built on appearances and connections, crumbled daily. Mrs. Carman learned all this from Dr. Hayes, who called regularly to inform her. "He'll remain free for now, but if convicted, he could face 3 to 8 years, the attorney explained. "His career as an attorney is over. The State Bar Association has already opened proceedings for his disbarment." "And how is he?" Dr. Hayes hesitated before answering. "Badly, Mrs. Carman, very badly. They say he doesn't leave the house, doesn't answer the phone, doesn't talk to anyone. His wife left, took the children." Mrs. Carman was silent for a moment. "Doctor, may I ask you something?" "Of course. I should feel satisfied with this, shouldn't I? With his downfall, with his suffering. You don't feel it?" "No, doctor, I just feel exhaustion, a very deep weariness." She couldn't explain it properly. Stephen was her son, her firstborn, the boy who once held her hand to cross the street. Seeing his destruction brought no joy, only a profound sadness, like mourning for someone who was still alive. Rose was the next to fall. With Stephen out of the picture, her other schemes came to light. Hidden debts, fraudulent businesses, a web of lies she had built over the years. Her husband discovered everything and filed for divorce. Her friends, who always surrounded her at parties and events, disappeared like smoke. One night, Mrs. Carman received a call. It was Rose, her voice trembling, almost unrecognizable. "Mom, I need to talk to you." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with years of resentment, unspoken words, wounds that never healed. "Then speak. I know you hate me. I know I deserved everything that's happening to me. But I needed to hear you say one thing." "What?" "That at some point in my life, you were proud of me." Mrs. Carman closed her eyes. She remembered the girl with braids who danced in the yard, who helped hang laundry, who laughed heartily at her father's stories. She remembered the teenager who wanted to be a teacher, who dreamed of changing the world. She remembered when all that died, year after year, replaced by arrogance, vanity, greed. "I was proud, yes, Rose, very proud, until you chose to be someone else." The sob on the other end was low, contained, as if Rose was holding back from completely breaking down. "Can I change, Mom? Do you think there's still time?" "Only you can answer that, my daughter. Only you." The call ended without a goodbye. Mrs. Carman remained there holding the phone, feeling the weight of 78 years of life on her shoulders. To be a mother, she thought, was to carry your children forever, even when they hurt you, even when they abandoned you, even when they betrayed you. The following days brought a decision she had been postponing for weeks. It was time to retrieve the treasure. One clear morning, Mrs. Carman woke before the sun. She put on the simplest clothes she had, slipped on her leather sandals, and called Tony and Peter. "You two are coming with me. There's something I need to show you." The two sons followed her without asking where. They walked through the desert. For hours, retracing the path Mrs. Carman had taken that morning, she almost gave up on living. The sun beat down, but neither of them complained. When they arrived at the spot, the large rock was still there, marking the location. The hole she had dug was partially covered with sand, but still visible. "It's here," Mrs. Carman pointed. "Dig." Tony and Peter worked together, taking turns with the hoe. After almost an hour, the blade hit metal. "We found it, Mom." They pulled the box from the earth and placed it at Mrs. Carman's feet. She knelt, opening the lid carefully. The gold gleamed under the sun, coins and relics that seemed to come from another time, another era. "My heavens," Peter whispered. "This is worth a fortune." "It's worth more than money can buy," Mrs. Carman replied. "It's the history of our family, the sacrifice of generations." She closed the box and stood up, looking at her two sons. "I could keep this for myself. I could sell it and live like a queen for the rest of my life. But that's not what I want." "What do you want, Mom?" Tony asked. "I want this to serve some good purpose, to help people in need, to build what is lacking in this land. A school, a health clinic, an artesian well, something that lasts longer than me, longer than you, longer than any of us." Peter and Tony exchanged glances. Then, almost at the same time, they nodded. "We'll help you, Mom," Peter said. "It's the least we can do." "It's the right thing to do," Tony added. Mrs. Carman smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Then let's carry this box back. We have a lot of work ahead of us." The journey back was different from the journey there. The weight of the box was shared between the three, and despite the physical effort, there was a lightness in the air, a sense of purpose none of them had felt in a long time. When they arrived home, it was already night. Stars dotted the desert sky, and the wind blew cool, carrying the smell of wet earth. Somewhere, finally, it had rained. "Mom," Tony said as they placed the box in the living room. "What will happen to Stephen and Rose?" Mrs. Carman sat in her rocking chair, her bones protesting after the long day. "That's up to them, my son. I did what I had to do to protect myself. Now each one makes their choice. Have you forgiven them?" She was silent for a moment, thinking about the question. "Forgiveness is a complicated thing, Tony. It's not something you decide and it's done. It's something you build, day after day, choice after choice." "I'm trying. That's all I can say." Peter, who had been quiet since they returned, finally spoke. "Mom, I want to ask you something." "Ask." "I want to stay here. Not to inherit anything, not to receive anything, just to be near you, to try to fix what I broke." Mrs. Carman looked at her middle son, seeing in him the same desperation she had seen in Tony weeks earlier, the same desire to start over, to be better. "You can stay, Peter, but you'll have to work. You'll have to prove yourself." "I know, Mom. I know." The house that once harbored only loneliness now held 3 people. It wasn't the family Mrs. Carman had once dreamed of, but it was what she had, and with time, who knew, it might be enough. That night, lying in the bed where she had slept beside James for over 50 years, she thought of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the discovery, the struggle, the victory. She thought of the treasure and what she would do with it. She thought of the children who had abandoned her and those who had returned. And before falling asleep, she whispered into the emptiness of the room, "James, my dear, you were right. About everything, about the boys, about life, about me. I just wish you were here to see." Silence was the only answer. But somehow, Mrs. Carman felt he was listening, that somewhere, somehow, he knew. The months that followed transformed the small desert community in ways no one could predict. Mrs. Carman, with the help of Dr. Hayes and her 2 sons who had stayed, began to put into practice the plan she had dreamed of since finding the treasure. The first step was to appraise the contents of the box. Dr. Hayes knew an antiquity specialist, a university professor, who came personally to examine the pieces. The man, with grey hair and thick-rimmed glasses, spent hours cataloguing each item, each coin, each relic. "Mrs. Carman," he said at the end, "you are sitting on a small fortune. Some of these coins are from the colonial period, extremely rare. And these gold pieces, they are 19th century artisanal works, likely of religious origin. How much is it worth?" "Enough to change many people's lives," he replied, his eyes shining with admiration. "And you intend to donate it all?" "I intend to use it. For good. It's different. The sale of the pieces was done gradually through auctions and careful negotiations. Dr. Hayes supervised each transaction, ensuring Mrs. Carman received a fair value. As the money came in, the projects began to move forward. The first was the artesian well. The community had suffered for decades from a lack of water, depending on water trucks that arrived once a week, if they arrived at all. With the treasure money, a team of engineers was hired to drill a deep well, capable of supplying not only the community, but also neighboring properties. The day the water first gushed out was a celebration. People came from miles away to see the miracle, clean, fresh water springing from the dry ground. Children ran around, wetting their feet, laughing with joy. Adults cried unashamedly, hugging Mrs. Carman as if she were a saint. "You gave us life, Mrs. Carman," said Old Man Joe at the general store, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "God bless you." But the water was just the beginning. The second project was the school. The community had only an improvised classroom where a volunteer teacher tried to teach children of all ages at once. With the treasure's resources, a real school was built. 3 classrooms, a library, a sports court, everything the children deserved. The inauguration took place 6 months after the trial. Mrs. Carman cut the ribbon with trembling hands, her eyes watery. On the bronze plaque at the entrance it was written, "James Miller Community School. Education is the seed of the future." "This is what your father wanted," she murmured to Tony, who was by her side. "For his name to be remembered for something good." The third project was the health clinic. The nearest community with medical care was a 2-hour drive on rough roads, and many people died from lack of timely assistance. With what was left of the treasure, a small health unit was built, with permanent nurses and weekly visits from doctors from the city. Each project brought more people to know Mrs. Carman, more stories to tell, more lives transformed. She, who one day had dug her own grave expecting to die forgotten, was now revered as a benefactress, almost a living legend. But not everything was rosy. Mrs. Carman's health, weakened by the years and the effort of the past few weeks, began to decline. She, who had always been as strong as an oak, now needed help to get up. Medication for her weak heart, constant care that Tony and Peter provided without complaint. It was on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, that Rose appeared. She came on foot along the dirt road, with a backpack on her back and her shoes covered in dust. She was thin, her hair now grey and undyed, her dress simple and faded. She looked nothing like the arrogant woman who had once demanded her mother go to the assisted living facility. "Mom," her voice was almost a whisper. "Can I come closer?" Mrs. Carman didn't answer immediately. She looked at her daughter for a long moment, seeing there the wreckage of a life built on false pretenses. "Come." Rose approached slowly, like a wounded animal afraid of another blow. She sat on the porch steps, at her mother's feet, not daring to look directly at her. "I came to ask for forgiveness, Mom. I don't expect you to give it. But I needed to come. I needed to say that I know how much I wronged you, how much I hurt you, how much I wasted the life you and Dad gave me." Mrs. Carman remained silent, listening. "I lost everything, Mom. My husband, my friends, my money, my dignity. And deep down I deserved to lose it. Because I built all of it on lies, on appearances, on being a person I wasn't really." Tears streamed down Rose's face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I went looking for Stephen, you know. He's doing badly, very badly. He doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he doesn't talk to anyone. I think he's losing his mind from guilt, from shame. And when I looked at him, I saw my future if I didn't change. That's why I came, Mom. Not to ask for money, not to ask for shelter, just to say I'm so sorry. And that if you let me, I want to try to be the daughter I never was." The silence that followed was long, heavy. The sun had already disappeared over the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. "Rose," Mrs. Carman finally spoke, "I spent my entire life taking care of you. I gave everything I had, and often what I didn't have, and you threw me away like I was trash." Rose lowered her head, her body trembling. "I know, Mom, I know. But I also learned something in these last few months. I learned that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I don't want to die poisoned, Rose. I want to die in peace." She extended her hand, touching her daughter's graying hair. "You can stay, you can try, but you'll have to. But you'll prove yourself, just like your brothers proved themselves." Rose lifted her face, her eyes red from crying. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you." That night, for the first time in decades, all 4 were together under the same roof. Mrs. Carman and 3 of her children. Stephen, the eldest, the one who had hurt her the most, was missing, but even absent, he was present in everyone's thoughts. It was Tony who finally spoke what everyone was thinking. "Mom, What do we do about Stephen? Mrs. Carman looked at her son, then at Peter and Rose. He's your brother. What do you think? The three exchanged glances in silence. It was Rose who answered. He needs help, Mom. He's sick, destroyed inside. If we don't do anything, he'll die. And you, Mom? Peter asked. Can you forgive him? Mrs. Carman closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of everything Stephen had done, the plan to throw her into the assisted living facility, the lies in court, the calculated betrayal. She thought of the pain he had caused, the sleepless nights, the humiliation. But she also thought of the boy he had once been, the clever boy who helped his father on the ranch, who protected his younger siblings, who dreamed of becoming an attorney to defend the weak. What had happened to that boy? Where had he lost his way? I don't know if I can forgive, she said finally, but I also can't watch my son die without trying to help. The decision was made that night. The next day, the three siblings would go to the city, retrieve Stephen, and bring him home. Not to absolve him, not to pretend nothing had happened, but to try, at least to try, to rebuild what remained of that shattered family. The trip was difficult. Stephen resisted at first, refusing to leave the dark, messy apartment where he had taken refuge. He was unrecognizable. The once impeccable man now had an unshaven beard, sunken eyes, a body too thin. But little by little, with patience and insistence, the siblings managed to convince him to go. When the car stopped in front of the adobe house, Mrs. Carman was waiting on the porch. Stephen got out slowly, his eyes downcast, unable to face his mother. "Mom." His voice was a mere thread. "I don't deserve to be here." "Perhaps not," she replied without moving, "but you are my son, and as long as I live, I will not give up on any of you." Stephen fell to his knees, sobs shaking his entire body. Mrs. Carman descended the steps slowly with Tony's help and knelt in front of her eldest son. She placed her hands on his face, lifting him so he would look her in the eyes. "You did terrible things, Stephen, things I will never forget. But I also saw you born, saw you take your first steps, saw you graduate. The son I raised is still in there somewhere, and if you want to find him again, I will help you." "Mom." He could barely speak. "Forgive me. Please, forgive me." "Forgiveness is a journey, my son, not a destination. We start today." The months that followed were a period of rebuilding, not just of the family, but of each of them individually. Stephen answered to the charges, served the alternative sentences imposed on him, and slowly, painfully, began to rebuild his life from scratch. Not as an attorney, that he lost forever, but as a man who finally learned that there are things more important than money and power. Rose found purpose helping at the school her mother had built. Peter took over the administration of the community projects. Tony continued by his mother's side, caring for her with the dedication he should have always had, and Mrs. Carman lived for another 2 years after all that. 2 years of peace, of purpose, of rebuilt love. She saw the school graduate its first class of students, saw the health clinic save lives that would have been lost, saw the well water transform the dry desert into a land of hope. When she passed away on a June morning, she was surrounded by all 4 of her children. There was no more resentment, no more bitterness, only the imperfect, complicated but genuine love of a family that had been lost and found again. At the funeral, the entire community attended. People she had helped, lives she had touched, stories she had transformed. The pastor, in his final address, said something that summed it all up. Mrs. Carman was a woman the world tried to destroy. Her own children abandoned her in the desert to die, but she refused to give up, and in doing so, she not only saved her own life, she saved all of ours. The grave where she was buried was next to James's, in the small community cemetery. On the headstone, at the children's request, was simply written, Mary Carmen Miller, Mother Guardian Light. Mrs. Carmen's story spread through the desert, passed from mouth to mouth, becoming a legend. The story of the old woman who was abandoned to die and found a treasure, of the mother who was betrayed by her children and forgave them, of the woman who transformed her own pain into hope for others. And in every school built, in every drop of water that gushed from the well, in every life saved at the health clinic, her legacy lived on. Because some stories don't end with death. Some stories just begin. If this story touched your heart, like, comment and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.